Hi, and welcome to yet another episode of the NewSpace India podcast. I'm very lucky to have Enrico here, who is the head of the Australian Space Agency, talking to me about all his plans for Australia and for India at the same time. So, Enrico, I hope India has been treating you well and you can handle spicy food. And welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Love spicy food. The hospitality from our partners in India has been very warm, very welcoming.
So, you have a industry background, and Australia is very lucky to have a person like you who comes from the industry to lead the space agency and build up the ecosystem there. So, what do you see the current landscape of Australia as, and what do you intend to achieve in your tenure?
Yeah, it's a very exciting time to be in space in Australia. Our space agency is only 4 years old, so relatively new compared to many global industries. But the formation of the agency in 2018 really catalyzed the nation around the opportunity space has for Australia. We have a rich heritage. We've partnered with NASA and the European Space Agency for more than half a century now on deep space exploration. And we've been a long-term user of Earth observation data for our primary industries. What we're seeing now is a real acceleration and diversification of the sector. We've identified our priority areas, we've developed roadmaps, we're seeing investment flow into a whole range of startups and new entities. And so as I project out, I'm really behind our purpose. How do we build a globally respected and thriving space sector here in Australia or here in India, we're obviously today, but back in Australia, that really lifts the economy, improves the lives and inspires the lives of all Australians.
Right. So, as you mentioned, Australia has been a very strong downstream economy. And in fact, I have a lot of friends from Australia who are living in Europe and other places who try to do the satellites. And I guess you yourself are an example of that, moving away and coming back at the same time. So what sort of space capabilities are you trying to achieve? Obviously you have a very strong downstream sector, but also across, upstream, midstream, what is it that you are trying to achieve?
Yeah, it goes back to the diversification thing. So fully upstream, we see access to space as a priority area for Australia. So most recently, we had NASA launch a sounding rocket campaign from Equatorial Launch Australia's site in Northern Territory. So obviously, accessing space, launching from Australia is the top of the value chain, and the one thing that can open Australian space industry to the full value chain of space activities. We were actually one of the first nations to launch a satellite into space from our own territory. And it's a shame we stopped. Imagine if we hadn't stopped, 50 years ago. But we are now seeing several spaceports being developed around the nation. The Australian Space Agency, we are the regulator for launch activities in Australia. So how do we do that responsibly and in a safe manner? So from an upstream perspective, we will see domestic rocket developers like Black Sky or Gilmore, AT Space develop and build rockets in Australia. And we anticipate we'll see a large international investment opportunity to bring rockets to launch from Australia. So that's sort of upstream. Midstream is where you're starting to see us develop more sophisticated satellites. So this year, the Australian government announced what's quite historic in terms of thinking long-term and the magnitude of investment in civil space with the announcement of our National Space Program for Earth Observation. So this program will see Australian design, build, operate its most sophisticated satellites to date. To date, we've had mostly CubeSats, but these will be sophisticated Earth observation satellites, really aligned with the government's priority in climate science, climate change adaptability.
Right, fascinating. And you have an array of things that are planned out, and I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of the Australian entrepreneurs to be involved. But at the end, it all comes down to programs and procurement that you can provide as support to SMEs and both startups. And there are two different beasts at the end. One is you can consider a smaller beast, but one is more like a baby that you have to help and support, right? So this is also one of the challenges that I think India has, where there are not many support programs not yet fully conceived when it comes to startups and SMEs to help them either find product market fit or find traction or file pilot programs and so on. But I see often that you guys have an allocation and then you have some programs rolled out. So what is it in both procurement as well as processes that you have in place that supports both? It could be 2 people startup, 3 people startup, university spin-off, or an SME that is trying to then diversify or scale or have something that they can then export out of Australia as well?
Yeah, there's quite a long answer. I'll try to keep it
Yeah.
short. But an array of programs that the Australian government has invested in and has investing going forward. And as a relatively new agency and new commercial sector, we can sort of look to what's worked overseas. We've seen in other markets procurement programs. Government as an early anchor customer has done amazing. Has allowed rapid growth of the sector. So to date, the Australian government has invested in a couple of programs targeted towards SMEs and startup organisations. And as a sector, we're really in the startup phase transition into the scale-up phase. So I'll just touch on a couple of our legacy programs and then some of our newer programs. So we have the Space Infrastructure Fund. The Space Infrastructure Fund around Australia has invested in capabilities that a variety of small to medium enterprises can access to develop their businesses, whether it's a mission control centre, tracking facilities, data analysis facility. For example, 3 of the projects we've funded in that will really uplift the sector. We also have our Moon to Mars program, and there's various aspects to our Moon to Mars programs. One of those is about supply chains. How do we get these new Australian companies, new technologies into international supply chains? Because as you know, space is an international business. So if Australian entities aren't developing their wares for export, it's going to really be hard to get enough market penetration and value to those organizations. So through various of our programs, we're investing in supply chains. The other one we're keen to do is, as we look to the future, is how do we get space heritage for Australian hardware? And so we've got some programs looking at how we can really accelerate our heritage as a nation. So that's another investment area. Then another area, to your point about PhDs and research, is we have a SmartSat Cooperative Research Centre in Australia, and they are funding PhDs, professorial chairs in some of Australia's leading universities. And so it is a really multifaceted approach. And then what's newest, is what I touched on before, is our National Space Program for Earth Observation, which is a major procurement program, right? So now you've got something you can signal to the market that there's a long-term order book to develop the sector. So our they're sort of the monetary programs that are in place, but it's not, government's role isn't just to fund and stimulate the sector. We are the regulator. So having a regulatory framework that's responsible and entrepreneurial, that's a really important part of enabling the sector, and we're responsible for that. Creating international partnerships. We're thrilled to be here at the Bangalore Space Expo. I'm leading a delegation of over 30 Australian professionals, over 20 organisations. And so we have a role under our international pillar to open doors internationally for partnerships. So it's not just about procurement and grants. It's removing the barriers to grow these businesses, providing international connections, but also setting the vision and the aspirations. Under the Civil Space Strategy, we're developing technical roadmaps for priority areas, and they set a 10-year vision and aspiration on where a particular priority area will go. Why is that important, or what's the value of that? If I reflect on our first roadmap, which was communication and associated technologies, naturally for Australia, large continent, communications are pretty important. What we found is when we celebrated the 1 year anniversary of that roadmap, we'd seen well over $100 million invested in the various pathways. And so that's shown to me our roadmaps set a vision, set an aspiration for the nation. And they're a real guide for investors and industry on where to place the safe bets. Where may government invest? Where's the market opportunities heading?
Right. I mean, fascinating that you have covered almost everything. I mean, I must probably congratulate you because you probably have something, planned for every kind of community and every kind of person. Now you're here in India, and as you said, you're leading a delegation here. That's very interesting. What are you trying to, achieve as topics of cooperation? Because I know that you have a very strong cooperation with ISRO at the government and to government level that is going on. But then, both on the Australian side and the Indian side, we have very strong NewSpace communities that are growing. Obviously, a large part of your delegation here is all Australian companies at the end that is trying to do business at the end. So, is there any focus areas beyond government that you're looking to achieve in India?
Absolutely. There's, I'd say, 3 main objectives to this delegation visit and having the agency here. The first is to really promote Australia's capabilities, our technologies, our services. I think Australia's history in space is known. People have seen the dish, understand our role in the Apollo landing, but I think probably internationally we have a better job to demonstrate the diversity of our sector, the niche technologies we may have in robotics and automation that stems from operating mine sites from thousands of kilometers away, to expertise we have in space medicine, life sciences, which coming into this role as head of the agency, I was delightfully surprised to understand what we've developed from our experience in managing our teams down in Antarctica and remote communities of Australia is directly transferable into space. So we want to tell that story while we're here in India. The second is really to demonstrate to India and our great partners in ISRO and InSpace and NISL that we can be a partner of choice. We're excited to be collaborating with ISRO on Gaganyaan mission. We're both partners in the Quad Space Working Group. And so there's various overlapping Venn diagrams that make sense for us as partners in the Indo-Pacific to collaborate on space. And also because as ISRO and India more broadly in the last few years has focused on commercialization of the sector, that really aligns with the purpose of the Australian Space Agency. So the third objective is how do we facilitate interconnection? How do we bring these entities together? How do they understand where collaborative opportunities can be?
Yeah, again, very, very interesting at the end. And, this is the Space Expo that is happening after the COVID time. And in fact, I think we've missed an edition. And it's after 4 years, actually, the community in India is meeting through the Space Expo. And obviously, it's been a while, and it's fascinating to see all the big delegations coming in, Australia, New Zealand. I think we have Australia, and then the Netherlands and the UK is also here. But then, you're here at the expo, and, there's 100 other exhibitors from different countries. So what are you looking to achieve at this expo?
Well, I think again, tell that story of our capabilities. Give a platform for the 20 plus Australian organisations that have come here to show their wares in artificial intelligent edge computing on orbit, to new Earth observation sensors, to launch capabilities. So really showcase them. Really tell that story. I think is a primary reason for being at the expo and supporting our terrific partners in Israel as well.
Right. So. Again, from where you stand, the picture is looking very bright, and the future is looking very prominent from a standpoint of capabilities, and hopefully creating a whole new ecosystem that not only caters to the local requirements but also globally around the world. But then at the end you need obviously cooperation from all kinds of people to be able to achieve a lot of this. So from your standpoint as to where you've seen what happened in the last 5 years since the space agency has gone through, where do you see Australia, and if there is any milestones that you have in your mind that you think the country will achieve in the next 5 years, where do you see everything going in the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a fascinating time to be leading the agency and seeing our sector come together. The next 5 years are critical. As you said, there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of cooperation. We're seeing capital inflow. But the next 5 years, we have to see scale up of our sector. We need to see these companies generate revenues, access export markets, and get space heritage. And I think there's multiple ways that's going to happen. From a launch perspective, within the next 5 years, Australia will be a launching nation again. I think both domestic rockets and internationally developed rockets, and that will make us a hub, I think, in the region for launch activity, leveraging our geography, our talent base, our trusted alliances. We can protect sensitive technologies. We'll see these first satellites under our National Space Program for Earth observation, be launched. Why is that important? Is historically Australia has been an excellent consumer of Earth observation data. We lead the world in our capabilities, for example, with Digital Earth Australia at Geoscience Australia, analysing the data for the downstream, as you said before. But this takes us to being not just a consumer, but a contributor to Earth observation data. And that's really important. We've had a bit of a free ride to date, and this means we become an indispensable partner to that global Earth observation set, which is so critical to understanding our planet. The other things you'll see us do is develop a rover for the moon. So last September, we announced we'd signed a Space Act agreement with NASA to develop an Australian rover that will go to the moon. It will pick up lunar regolith take her to a NASA plant to extract oxygen. That's going to allow us to demonstrate to the world the experience we have in remote operations, which stems from our resources sector, but also the experience we have robotics and autonomy. And so I think the next 5 years are going to be very telling. We'll see our international partnerships strengthen because of those programs as well.
Right. And one of the interesting things that I read some time ago was a very interesting mapping of the Australian space economy. I think some of the institutions that are tracking these in Australia are doing a fascinating job, because I've never seen such extensive tracking of capabilities that is being done in other countries, even including the US. And then, that is, I think, leading to a lot of the strategy that you are putting together and so on. And I read, somewhere that you are looking to grow the Australian space sector to something like 12 billion and have about 20,000 jobs or so by the year 2030. It's a very interesting target that you have put together. I'm sure that your own background in the industry has contributed to a lot of that kind of target setting framework at the end. But then, there needs to be parts of space economy that needs to grow, that, for you to achieve that particular target. And obviously the launch sector is very small compared to the rest of the space economy, and building satellites is also smaller when you compare to the application side at the end. So how do you foresee achieving this target, and where do you see, which parts of the space economy do you see leading up to this kind of a number?
So I think we will see growth across upstream, midstream, downstream in terms of jobs. If you look today, we have several CubeSat programs in work. We're about to step into some of our organizations that are involved in IoT or even aircraft communications, start to build constellations. So I wouldn't underestimate the advanced manufacturing capability that's going to be established in Australia. And through a recent government program, there will be actually investments in space parks and space manufacturing centers. So I think sort of that design, development, operation of satellites is going to be quite significant in the years to come, as will be launch, as we talked about. And launch, like you've seen in New Zealand with Rocket Lab, once you have domestic launch, it opens up a whole supply chain opportunity, and it opens up missions you wouldn't have as a nation. Interplanetary science mission that can support the great planetary science community we have in Australia, for example. You're absolutely right. The downstream applications, there's still a tremendous amount the world can do with Earth observation data for primary industries, for productivity. We're just scratching the surface. Sort of quantum sensing from space that's going to enhance prospecting for minerals, for example. And so I'm very confident in the jobs growth, and we're seeing that. There is, space companies of all sizes in Australia, from startups to the primes, are hiring today. It's a very competitive field, and if anything, that's the inhibitor to growth is developing the workforce at the pace we need to. And so I think that's how I'd broadly answer it, Narayan. I think it's across our priority areas where you'll see us develop those skill sets. But we've got some great companies. One is Space Machines company that are part of our delegation here, and they're already working across the India-Australia border with teams in both jurisdictions, and they're looking at on-orbit logistics. And so as our new Minister, Ed Husic, has been promoting, a Minister of Industry and Science, is we need to back Australians. We've got some Australians with some great ideas and really have that self-belief. We can mix it with the best in the world. And I think that's going to generate a lot of opportunities.
Right. And good luck to you, as you get there. Maybe one last final question before I leave you. You obviously mentioned about Gaganyaan and the ISRO program. ISRO is the elephant in the room in India, at least, so we cannot really say no to any kind of programs that they have, right? So what are some initiatives that you foresee that is happening in India that can extend this G2G cooperation? But also, I guess, in terms of other aspects, because today you see India, not just on the human space flight, they starting to work on, space situational awareness. They're starting to work on many other interesting topics that are out there. So do you see this level of cooperation extending?
So over the last few weeks, we've had detailed workshops with ISRO and InSpace and other INISL and other organizations about where our target priority areas for collaboration. So in Australia, we have our 7 priority areas, but out of those, what are sort of ripe for the Australia-India relationship? And where we've landed is Earth observation, PNT, because of its criticality to so many industries, more so every day. and then space medicine, life sciences, which obviously has a direct tie to Gaganyaan mission into the future. But sort of intersecting that is enabling technologies, artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing in particular. And so it's the overlap of those two where, we'll be encouraging through our program sort of cross-border collaboration. As it pertains to Gaganyaan, you can imagine Australia is a great place for tracking and guidance and telemetry, and that's an area we're exploring with ISRO to support as well.
Right. So good luck to you and the rest of your team. I hope there's going to be a lot of press announcements and all kinds of things that will happen both for you with ISRO and for the companies with Indian counterparts at the end. Just to leave you with one last thought outside of the space industry, I would love to know, what are you looking to try or test here in India outside of the space work that you're going to do? Is it food or is it something else?
Absolutely food. I got introduced to various things at breakfast this morning. Is it dosas? Yeah, and sambar. Yeah. So I know I'm very excited to try as much local cuisine as I can while I'm here, and fortunate to be in Bangalore, but also visiting Hyderabad and New Delhi later this week.
Right. So I hope we can keep bringing you back to India and, have all of this cooperation go ahead. Thank you so much for spending time with me and, allowing me to record you today.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Narayan. Great questions. Great to meet you and chat. Thank you.